It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us from all around the world. Thank you for being here for another live Action for Happiness event. My name is Mark Williamson, and in this session, we're going to be talking about how to spread kindness, how to make generosity go viral, and how to do more to drown out negativity and create more of a sense of hope, possibility, and encourage all the good things that we want in the world. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Chris Anderson, who has been an inspiration to me for many years as the man behind the incredible TED Talks and all the associated work that involves. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
If you're new to one of these events, a very warm welcome. This is a community of people trying to build a happier and kinder world together. These live events are just part of the many things we and our volunteers do to help spread well-being and to encourage more generosity in communities all around the world. If you're a regular, welcome back. As always, we'll be keeping it supportive and kind and relevant in the chat, and you will have your chance to ask Chris questions. Chris and I will be having a conversation together about today's theme and about this wonderful book Chris has written called Infectious Generosity, which is the heart of our conversation today. So thank you all, and let's dive straight in. Chris, I don't think you need much introduction as a man associated with something as well known and globally recognized as TED, but I wondered if you could tell us a bit of the story about what's brought you from TED to this theme of infectious generosity and how that's played out for you personally.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for taking time out for a virtual event. Very nice of you. Nice to meet you. Um, so I think generosity has always woven through my life, but more, I've been on a quest for it. My parents were terribly generous people. I mean, that they were missionaries. They could have made a lot of money. My dad was a doctor. Instead, they went to Pakistan and did cataract surgery in the desert, living in a mud hut for lots of people. And they had this passionate belief that you should live for something bigger than you are. It was quite intimidating, honestly. Like I think I've spent most of my life feeling a little bit guilty that I really wasn't as generous as I should be. After I was a media entrepreneur for a long time. I started that in England, publishing magazines, came to America, came to this weird conference called TED, that technology, entertainment, design, kind of fell in love with it. And after the dot-com crash, when the company I'd built went a bit wobbly, honestly, I did this sideways move. I was able to buy TED, take it over, turn it into a nonprofit, and ask myself the question, what could we do with these talks? So this was 2001. There was online video wasn't even a thing then. But in 2006, it became a thing. And because we were a nonprofit, we kind of felt this obligation to give away what we had and let other people share it. And so that, people around the world could see these talks instead of just the few hundred who came to the conference. People thought that might actually kill the conference, because why would you go and pay big money if the talks were for free online? Turned out the opposite happened. These talks went viral. Actually, demand for the conference increased. And so we went, first of all, that was exciting. And secondly, this is weird. You give something away in this connected era and lots comes back. Kind what some of these internet theorists are saying is actually true, that the rules have changed. And so we adopted at TED this kind of strategy, if you like, of radical generosity, and to see where it would take us. And it took us in several directions, the most notable of which was giving away our brand and offering people a free chance to license TEDx events, which again seemed a little bit bonkers because we had no real control over what they would put up, although we encouraged them to do it well, as best we could. And there were some truly embarrassing moments, but actually it was an amazing thing that happened. 3,000 events are now, actually more than 3,000 are being held around the world. So just by giving away our brand, we suddenly have 60, 70,000 people around the world volunteering to put on TED events. And then they give us the content that we put up online, 25,000 videos a year. So this was the bonkers thing, and it was a riddle for a long time. The rules had changed. Like we did this because we were a nonprofit, but if we had been a business, it would have been the smartest thing we could have done as well. Um, you can't run a business with just a few people in New York overseeing 3,500 global events. Can't be done. And this way, if you're, through generosity, it can. So this is basically, Mark, what led me into this journey of it felt like in this connected era, the rules around generosity of what you hold on to and what you give away have changed. And uh, uh, and the more you give away, the more you can be amazed at the sort of ripple effects that can spread. And so that was the heart of it. That was the start.
How lovely. And I'm certainly looking forward to talking about those ripple effects, Chris. But just before we dive into the detail, just to say on behalf of everyone, I think, in this community, I think so many millions of lives have been touched by that TED generosity. And I remember the first time I saw the Ken Robinson classic talk about schools and creativity, which I think I've probably watched more than anything else in my life as a thing that I want to keep going back to. And of course, Ken Robinson is no longer here, but his, as you say in the book, his legacy of that talk and so much else has rippled out in incredible ways. Brené Brown was someone who's had a huge impact on many in our community, and of course, many of us discovered her work through TED. So it feels, it feels worthy of noting how much that. I guess that kindness instinct has led to so much, but it if we stop and think for a moment about what this says about human nature, I've always felt that there were sort of two sides to human nature. The one that's self-interested, that we might have thought about in the context of a selfish gene, sort of Darwinian style way of thinking, and the other which is actually also to some extent a survival instinct of caring for each other, and that in some ways culture can promote either or both or of those two instincts to sort of self-preserve and to support each other. And it feels like, particularly modern culture, is exacerbating the former, not the latter. How do you see that tension? I mean, how are we wired, do you think, towards generosity or selfishness?
Yeah, so I think we're wired for both. And
Mm.
I think this debate, are people fundamentally good or not, is pointless. It's really asking the wrong question. I think there's people, almost everyone is capable of being really good and also really nasty, depending on how we're provoked. And so the key question is, what is it that allows us to be our better selves? And in a way, to me, that's almost like that should be the fundamental question of education. Like if we can answer that question, life will be better. We all face these battles the whole time on so many areas of life of trying to manage and direct our sort of our instinctive selves. Our instinctive selves can be good or bad. There are good and bad things in them, but they need fine-tuning the whole time, or we fall into a world of addiction and sloth and so forth. And we all know, we all fight these sort of battles on trying to keep fit, trying not to procrastinate, trying to eat well, that take conscious reflection over what we instinctively do. And I believe that the biggest single battle of all is the battle on trying to discover and nurture our generous selves. Our generous selves are in there. Like generosity is deeply wired into every human except a very few psychopaths. Where when we see someone suffering, for example, we instantly feel a desire to help. It's just like that is raw human wiring. And the question is how do you bring that out, and how do we use that to empower more kindness? Because the magic that so many people aren't familiar with is that when we do that, it is actually the pathway to deeper happiness for ourselves. This is the big discovery, and so in principle, with a little more wisdom around this, more widely spread, you could have a world where everyone realized that if they built generosity and kindness into their lives, A, they make the world better, B, they make themselves happier. What is not to like?
Well said. And it's a lovely link back to our core mission with Action for Happiness. I mean, in my own life, Chris, I spent the first sort of 20 years, 30 years maybe, pursuing this sort of conventional model of do well, build up impressive qualifications or job or income and stuff, and found myself feeling lost and insecure and very stressed, actually. And I've spent the last sort of 15, 20 years, more focused on, well, entirely focused on how can I contribute. And wasn't expecting the happiness that came with that to be there as the byproduct. It almost wasn't very obvious to me, and yet has become, as you say, a deep sense of inner fulfillment. And how can we help more people discover that earlier in their life journeys? Do you think it's that the sort of messaging we encounter as we develop and grow is not bringing that message out enough?
I think that's right. And it's actually a motivation for writing this book. We are telling ourselves the wrong stories.
Mm.
Like there are structural reasons why the mainstream media and social media are by and large full of things to be frightened of. Turns out that's a very powerful key for grabbing human attention. I won't say it's a cognitive bug because there are obvious survival reasons why we should pay rapid attention to threats. But that feature of our psychology is being used against us, either intentionally or unintentionally, by mainstream media and social media. The stories that lead our news every day are of awful things that have happened in the world. And on social media, the people who most eloquently provoke disgust, anger, and outrage at the other are the ones who get the followers. It's really annoying. And so that creates this self-fueling arms race that is frankly turning us all into nasty people. That's what we have to figure out. That's what we have to combat and change. And I think it can be changed. There's some evidence that the next generation coming through are starting to figure this and that they're sick of the meanness. And when you look at who are the big influencers that are impacting, the next generation, it's people like Mr. Beast, who's, he's wild and crazy, and he's probably the top influencer on YouTube, 230 million subscribers or something. He shows things that are wonderful and crazy and hilarious and fun, and often that are super kind and generous, and his followers love it. So this is not something we should be in despair about. This is something that we should be tactical about. We should be smart. We should say, okay, what do we do? Just as we have figured out life hacks in our lives to, for example, regularly exercise. Okay, not everyone. But I mean, we try. We figure out habits that are meaningful to us and they help us. So we should be able to spark each other to, just discover more generosity habits of different kinds. And there are so many different kinds and ways to be generous. I think everyone can find the way that is right for them. It's not just about writing a check, for sure.
I love that personalization idea. I mean, it's taken me years to learn habits around food and exercise that work for me. I found I was incredibly harsh on myself and was using the F word a lot, like you effing idiot. And I rebranded that to be the way I'd like to be in the world: friendly, useful, calm, and kind. So every day I check in with myself once a day to say, how have I been friendly, useful, calm, and kind today? And that's my little daily reminder to try and live this way. But coming back to I guess the online world, many of us, and of course you're a pioneer in the digital world, but many of us had real hope about the beginning of the internet, about people being able to connect and share ideas. And as you were saying, partly because we've got this sort of ad driven and revenue driven clicks and attention thing online, where we realize that bad news and chaos grabs attention. I think you make the point in the book that actually we can do a little act, and whereas a kind act might have been seen by a few people locally, in days gone by, now that has the potential to be seen by millions and actually be a source of influence. I wondered, can you share any little stories of small acts that weren't even, meant to be going viral that then went around the world?
I mean, there are many, and one I mentioned even in the intro of the book is just a rainstorm. Person in a car hops out of the car, gives their umbrella to a couple who are being drenched by the side of the road, hops back into their car. This has probably happened a lot of times, But in the connected age, someone happened to capture that on video, and the video explodes and goes viral. It's seen by many millions of people. And you read the comments about that on Reddit, and people are literally being inspired. Like, it's people saying, "Wow, I guess I'm going to have to carry some extra umbrellas in my car now." And this is because there's actual science here. Like we we don't just respond to generosity that we receive. That definitely is, that reciprocity is a powerful instinct. Someone's kind to us, we will want to be kind. And there's amazing new science on that. But we also are uplifted by seeing other acts of generosity. And so in a world where a video can be seen by an indefinite number of people, that there's huge potential in that. We could be using the internet to inspire each other to be our better selves. Unfortunately, other things also spread online. And the question is, so to me, one of the key questions is, what does it take for us to win this attention war? What does it take for us to push back on the blizzard of nastiness that comes? And with content and stories that are full of wonder and delight. And, if on social media, for all its evils and woes, there actually is an awful lot of that happening as well. And I feel like, it's kind of like 60-40 tilted to the nasty stuff at the moment, with a bit of collective effort, and possibly a few tweaks by the companies themselves. I think that actually could change, and more people would have a wonderful experience and be inspired by what they see. I think already a lot of people have curated their social media experience to be that. Like, you can, depending on who you follow, and the algorithms will say, okay, this person actually likes kindness, not nasty videos of crime or whatever. Like, it can figure that out, and so we can. It's a winnable battle, I think.
I agree, and I've got this principle that I see a lot in our community about look for the good and then share what's good. And I wonder if we could try a little mini experiment right now. I'd love to ask you about one of the famous experiments that you mentioned in the book in a moment. But wherever you are right now, listening to Chris and being part of this event, just take a moment to bring your mind to something you've seen recently that's uplifting, an act of kindness, a little moment of friendship or connection. And if you can, I would love it if you could spare a few words in the chat just to give us an example of something that's given you a little lift recently, something that was generous, kind, friendly, supportive. So if anyone here of the hundreds who are part of this right now could share a few words in the chat, I'd love to hear just some examples of little acts of what Chris has been talking about, really. So I'll read a few of these out as they emerge on the chat. A hug. My son sent me a gift. A hug from the co-worker, an encouraging note in the mail, feeding the birds, children picking up litter, friends getting in touch after my dog passed away, sharing lunch, planting trees, somebody helping when my car broke down, holding a new baby, a friendly phone call, someone listening, sending a gift, praise from my manager, thanking first responders, phoning friends, people returning lost items, litter picking in the local area, meeting a new puppy, giving flowers, volunteering, people opening the doors for strangers. Chris, these feel like very much day-to-day actions, but they remind me in some way that kindness is all around us all the time.
Yeah, it absolutely is. At the start of the pandemic, a woman called Catherine Barrett started this group on Facebook called the Kindness Pandemic. And it was just prompted by, someone had dropped a box of tissues in their building common space, saying, if anyone wants one, please take one. Everyone was feeling teary. She was moved by it, posted this picture, and went to bed. And when she came back in the morning, this group had exploded, kind of like the chat right here, right now. And people had the most moving stories, and it became Facebook's biggest group. It's like 500,000 people joined, and it's so inspiring. And these are stories. Everyone has their story of some experience of kindness that never get reported. And so we form this impression that we are this dark and dangerous, nasty species of people, when actually the true stories that are going on, it would give us a very different picture. I see that B. Hunter here on the chat talks about how the mood shift that he or she had when they were given a cup of coffee for free at a drive-through, paid for by the person ahead. There's a guy I write about in the book called John Sweeney, who started a movement called Suspended Coffees that encourages cafes around the world to enable exactly that. And all of this for him just started, he had a terrible childhood, but discovered for himself the power of generosity and just paying attention to someone on the street and talking with them and what happened when you were involved in a conversation, then bought them a coffee. And he was so inspired by some of these experiences that he did this incredible movement. And so I think what's beautiful is that a lot of these things feel small, but many of them can actually build into extraordinary ripple effects.
Mm. And one of the other things in your, I mean, so I think we all know that and believe it, and perhaps think that there were a few people that behave that way, and a few of us can do this. But actually, one of the things that really inspired me was the extent to which, when you do an experiment like with a random group, the proportion that decide to be generous is actually goes against, almost flies in the face of economic logic. So, would you like to tell us about this amazing experiment where people were given away? I think it was $10,000. Is that right? How does it work?
That's right. So a few years ago, I announced this thing on the internet and invited people to apply to be part of the mystery experiment. All we said was that it was going to be an interesting experiment, possibly stressful, possibly life-changing, would take some time. Do you want to participate? Didn't mention money. A couple thousand people applied. 200 were selected at random, and they got this email saying, "Yeah, we'd like to wire $10,000 into your PayPal account. Is that okay?" And now they thought, "Oh my God, this is a scam." But eventually, they took the money, and the only strings attached, they could spend it however they wanted. They just had to report to us how they spent it. And what was shocking to the social scientists who worked with us on this experiment, which was made possible by an anonymous donor in the tech community, what they what they discovered was that on average, people spent more than 60% of the money they received generously to family, friends, strangers, causes. And the more people gave away, and especially to causes, actually the happier the greater the level of happiness they reported later in. So this was when they published the paper on this, it sort of sparked headlines, and it was actually one of the catalysts that said, "Okay, I just have to write this book," because when you put the pieces together, that there is generosity is wired into everyone, and a response to generosity that strong, much stronger than, for example, most economists believe, that strong is also there. And we're in the connected age. Wow, that means that ripple effects can happen like never before. So let's think about this, and yeah. So I find that combination. It's the combination of the biology and our connectedness that makes this exciting to me.
Yes, and I think you found that it wasn't, it was even true for people who were really like in a fairly precarious financial situation themselves, that they still chose to be generous, that we all have this, even when we might need the money, that we want to also help. But of course, what you also talk about in the sort of second part of your book about how we can put this into practice is that, of course, giving can be so much more than just giving of money. So could we maybe talk for a moment about some of the other ways that we can be generous beyond money?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, really the start of it all is the gift of attention. And that's a bigger gift than it feels like. I mean, yourself, walking to work, say, you're busy, you're in your zone, you've got things to do, and say there's someone who needs something there. Every bone in our body says, just keep walking. And usually that's what we do. Usually, honestly, that's probably what I do. Maybe a bit less now, but usually that's what I do. That it feels uncomfortable and awkward to stop and look someone in the eye because you are, but that is actually a big deal. That is a gift. And often for people, being seen is is one of the biggest gifts that they could. You can change someone's day almost just like that. Because so often we're just like ships passing in the night, sleepwalking through life. So it starts there, and that even that gift is hard to do unless you're ready to embrace a kind of a generosity mindset. Um, the best way to get that is, well, two things really. One is some people kind of really hate themselves. Like they feel for whatever reason, whatever's happened, they just feel like they're just angry with themselves. And the first step of any of this is to forgive yourself and to know that, life is hard and think people, including you and including me, can do bad things. Now let's move on and to forgive yourself. And there's lots of resources on that. I'd say the next step is to embrace the practice of gratitude. Turns out there are so many things to be grateful for, starting with the fact that the miracle that when you open your eyes, you discover that you're in this multimedia sensory extravaganza called the real world. I mean, it's incredible that we're alive and that we get to experience anything at all. And from your loved ones to the beauty of nature to the fact that there's an electric socket in the wall 12 feet from you that can empower you to do a million different things. I mean, there are just so many reasons to be grateful. From that gratitude, you actually are triggering your own response to generosity. It's like, okay, the universe is giving me things, I'm going to give back. And so that is what makes it easier to do anything. So it starts there with the gift of attention. And then from there,
Just on
yeah,
that, just to pause there for a second, because I think you made so many really important points there, Chris. I think that point about gratitude almost creates a reciprocity of like, I feel like I've been blessed and I want to give back. I love that. But a thing I've noticed, I was really skeptical about gratitude when I first moved into this sphere a decade or so ago. And I rather reluctantly started writing down things that I was grateful for at the end of each day. And it's been completely life changing for me because, well, first of all, it puts things in context. It makes you realize, as you said, the kind of precious privilege of being alive compared to the alternative. But also I found that it made me sort of be more like hunting for the good. So like during the day, because I knew I'd be thinking about like what would I be grateful for at the end of the day, I'd be on the lookout for good things. So it made me more tuned into like, oh, that was kind, or oh, he was friendly. And so I think there's the reciprocity, but there's also the sort of like it changes your antenna a little bit. Have you noticed that?
I think so. I think so. I mean, everything we do is habit forming in a way, and it sort
Mm.
of it guides what we do in the future. So yeah, I think so. If you go through the world looking for a reason to be happy about something, you will find it.
Mm.
You will find it. I mean, it's just living in modernity. There are so many things that we take for granted, and if we for one moment didn't, we'd have a chance to feel
Yeah.
grateful, happy about it, happy that it's
So
there.
I interrupted your flow, and you saw attention and then gratitude. Where do you go next?
Well, so I mean, look, there are just many different ways to be grateful. I mean, in the book, I focused about acts of generosity that have a capability to create ripple effects. So, I mean, there's the obvious one of, the gift of knowledge. Sharing something that you know can obviously help other people. I think in the era we're in right now, bridging is a really important act of generosity. It takes a little bit of courage, but to be the person in the say, we're talking about online, in the online chat who says refuses to just chime in on the sort of the sort of the arrow slinging and says, well, wait a sec, isn't there another way of thinking about this? Someone who can respond with curiosity and respect. Could you tell me more and explain that? I don't understand it right now. I don't agree with you. That kind of tone of voice would be very transformative. It's a gift, and there are amazing stories of people who've figured out how to do that, and it can really create ripple effects.
I
And
really
then
love that point. So just to make sure I've understood that correctly, so in this kind of polarized, almost us versus them culture, even when we see something that we might disagree with or we might want to shift, we can, as you say, bring a tone of voice that says, "Oh, that's not how I see it, but could you tell me a bit more about that?" And this is kind of my perspective. So it's not so much that we stop standing firm for our beliefs, but it's just we change the tone of the interaction. Is that right?
correct. To listen with respect. I tell the story in the book of Darrell Davis, who's a African American musician who built a weird friendship with a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and listened to him and tried to understand why on earth he could have the views he had. Eventually, he left the Klan, and a couple hundred others did as well. And the story was seen by millions of people. I mean, it's just, it feels very uncomfortable in a divided age to be in the middle. And I'm definitely not articulating for both sidesism. What I'm articulating for is curiosity and respect and the
Mm,
willingness to be in that uncomfortable place. You tend to get slings and arrows from both sides when you do that. But there are, I'm convinced, more people craving a less angry world. And so ultimately, I think you can attract allies that way. If you look on X, there's a guy Amidar whose posts I love. This is on Israel Gaza, and you can't imagine anything more divisive than that. And he is constantly finding a respectful voice that acknowledges the agonies of both sides. And
mm.
it's amazing what he's doing. So there's that. Hospitality, I think, is an underrated form of generosity. But bringing people together, say, like if you did nothing else as a result of this, but invited 6 friends to dinner, A, they'll love it, but B, have a conversation about, is there anything we could do together that we can't do individually to make a difference locally? Really interesting conversation. Who knows what ripple effects come from that? Sharing resources contacts is actually uh, a- an important thing to do. Like it can cost you a 10-minute email and can change someone else's life if you introduce them to the right person. And then if you're someone of a creative bent, you know, the generosity of sharing enchantment is something, and it's especially possible in this era that we're in right now, where things that can be shared online, photography, art, music, can be shared to an indefinite number of people. That is special, and it may lead to wild things happening as a result. So there's just a lot of fertile ground here, and I think the thing that really has hit me, Mark, just thinking about all this is that there's an asymmetry to generosity that is what gives its power. The act of giving is often far less difficult than the benefit of receiving. Um, this is certainly true with money, where a rich person can give away, say, $1,000, may not, they may not even notice it, but that could make a huge difference to whoever receives that. I mentioned about giving away contacts, but every form of generosity, it may, a gift of knowledge, you have it. You still have it after you've given it away, but that person may benefit from it. And in the internet age, that knowledge can spread further. There's just so many examples of this. So that if we could persuade more people to engage a significant part of their time being generous, all boats rise. That's the amazing thing. All boats rise.
I really love that sort of win-win sort of approach, and particularly the mention of bringing people together. I guess the heart of this community here with Action for Happiness is about how we can get together to shift culture and create a sort of more a kinder and more sort of happiness focused way of living and being. And one particular way, which I think really resonates with what you said, is through volunteering. So we have volunteers that run local groups and gatherings and courses and support each other on our app community where there's hundreds of thousands of people. And I love that idea of sharing enchantment, where people share sort of images or quotes they found inspiring, and the sort of sense of both togetherness but also uplift and sort of being there for each other.
Mm.
So you might think of it from the outside as being a bit glib and a bit sort of superficial, but actually it's anything but. I see people coming into those spaces sharing the deepest, darkest challenges in their lives, and what they get in response is support and ideas and friendship and kind words. And we regularly get people saying it's been life changing. And as you say, a very small act of giving a little bit of time here can have this genuinely profound shift on other people's lives. So I find the way you've described that really heartwarming. I think there's also this research that you touched on about the ripple effect, though. So is it Christakis' work about the network effects that shows that when we, I think it's that if when we see or experience kindness, it doesn't just affect, I get this wrong, but it doesn't just affect our friends, but it can affect our friends' friends, or sort of like a certain number of
Right.
degrees of separation. Is that right?
Right. Basically, almost every human trait is massively influenced by our social networks, and what we do ripples out, and that's true for both good and bad. And it means that we we should never think of an act just in isolation. That there will always be consequences from it, one way or another. So, that's exciting and also can be alarming if we get that part wrong.
Mm. We're going to come to questions in a moment. So if you have questions for Chris, please do use the Q&A function. And if you see a question you'd like, please give it a thumbs up and it will rise up the list. But Chris, in your book, you sort of you go through three stages. The why does this matter? We've talked a bit about that, the how we can be generous, and we've given lots of examples of that. But you have this sort of idea of what if? What if the world was different? What if we could harness the internet as a more of a force for good? Do you want to say a bit more about a vision for how we can, well, both what we'd love to see in the world, but also particularly for each of us, how we can amplify your message here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the book I talk about trying to imagine a world where generosity is much more deeply embedded. What would that mean for the internet? What would that mean for business? And what would that mean for philanthropy? And I think there's actually exciting stories to be told on all of them. I mean, as far as the internet's concerned, I do think it's an urgent agenda to try and move it to a kinder place. Apart from anything else, we've got this AI revolution coming. Guess where it is obtaining all its knowledge and cues about what human values are and what humans care about and who they are? It's the internet, and good, goodness only knows what Chat GPT 7 will make of humans if we're not careful. So I mean, we've there's it's while we distrust each other, like at present, we can't solve any of our other problems. So I think we have to fix the internet. And I think there is a pathway to doing that. I think there are a lot of inspiring people online who are trying to do that. I think the next generation, as I indicated, is already on that journey. And so that's part of it. But it's not an easy thing to fix. In companies, I'm encouraged by lots of sign that companies themselves are, through some combination of good intent and their leaders, but also being forced to by their employees, are gradually doing more to embed generosity, especially generosity to the planet. Many companies are seriously committed to a net zero future. And the reason why, I know a lot of people were all sort of very skeptical of capitalism and in dismay at how that profit motive poisons so much. But there's something shifting here where to make profits today, you increasingly need to inspire and attract and recruit brilliant minds. That is where value was created. And most brilliant minds don't want to work for an evil company. And so anyone who's in a company actually has more power than they know to meet up with others and say, how could we move our company to be kinder to the planet, or contribute to the public good in some other way? So I can picture processes, and there are already amazing stories in many companies that are showing leadership and inspiring each other and persuading others to raise their game. So I don't think we should kind of give up on the business world just yet, honestly.
Mm.
And then yeah, the third area is in philanthropy, where big philanthropy especially is viewed with so much cynicism today. We look for every reason to be snarky about any kind of big gift or act of philanthropy that you could talk about. And it's understandable that people are resentful of wealth inequality, that they are right to be so in many ways, and are skeptical about how did someone make that money, and what was their motivation? Was it mixed? I think the trouble with this is that we end up in a world where we actually slow down, that you almost give the rich every incentive not to give away, when we should actually be doing the opposite. We should be urging them to triple down, quadruple down on what they give, because I'm convinced that there is this amazing underexplored possibility space for philanthropy to do absolutely incredible things. And I'm not talking about putting up a building in your university with your name on it. I'm talking about solving some of the biggest challenges that we face, from climate to nuclear arms to AI to inequality to poverty to hunger and so forth. um, there is so much capital out there that could be redeployed. And so I would love that debate around philanthropy to shift from not how awful it is, but how amazing it could be.
Mm.
And that's even if people don't have money, I really think that everyone should be involved in that conversation because I think and it's a longer conversation, but I think for a very, very long time, there is going to be a huge amount of private capital piling up. I think many of the people who have it actually are willing to give back. I've talked to quite a few of them, and been involved in a project to encourage them to do that. I think there's a transformation that could happen there as well.
I agree, and it's actually relevant to Action for Happiness and all the people here. We're a small non-profit, and these kind of talks and events have had 400,000 people join them live in recent years, and that's made possible because of a few philanthropically minded people have helped to sort of fund and support what we're doing. So we've benefited from a few people that have discovered that sort of sense of fulfillment. But again, it could be so much bigger, this kind of way of being, if more people saw that. Chris, I think that links to something, a phrase I saw in the book about imperfect generosity, and of course that might be letting go of some people's sort of slightly mixed motives for being kind and just noticing the kindness. But I guess that probably also applies to us, that we're all in this forgiving ourselves, that we're imperfect in our generosity, and that's okay. But doing the best we can and being as generous as possible feels still like the most important thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the biggest traps in thinking about generosity is to come on the wrong side of this classic philosophical debate of pure intent. Is it generous if it's not fully pure intent? I think the honest thing to say is that it is never fully pure intent. I mean, even if you're just being kind because your conscience is telling you, you're scratching an itch. You're feeling better about a guilty conscience. It's and so I think we should celebrate generosity in all its forms. In Rule out a few cases where it is purely cynical, evil, absolute greenwashing and nothing else. That is very rarely the case, though. Usually, including in myself, there's mixed motivation. I happen to know that being generous will make me happier. I happen to know that being generous may well lead to other effects where people want to, I don't know, work with me in future. Um, that's probably part of my motivation in doing it. I want that to be the story of me. Does that make the act evil? I don't think it should. I think with everyone, we should celebrate generosity and celebrate the fact that we're in an era where someone can know that being generous is actually good for their reputation. That's
Mm.
great. That's
I think
good.
that's
We
right. And
need,
this idea of sort of outward spirals rather than downward spirals, or ripples, or whatever the right phrasing is. I want to come on to questions, Chris. You've got some great ones here. Nada's asked, how can we be kind and generous, but at the same time protect ourselves from being abused or treated like a doormat, taken for granted?
yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have a perfect answer for every circumstance. I mean, there are definitely some people out there. I mean, there are psychopaths out there, and if you're kind to them, maybe or they just take it and then try and destroy you. There are circumstances where your best strategy is just to not engage. Um, but in general, I think the surprise is how people do respond, and I think so. So I think we want a world where people are willing to take a risk and be a bit courageous. So I'm not, if the physical safety is at stake, then I'm not saying do that. But if it's just your sense of resentment and someone being fair, take a risk, be kind, and you may be amazed at how someone responds. If they don't, you can that evening think to yourself, I sought to be my best self, and I'm proud that I did that. And I'll try with someone else another time. I mean, humans have evolved these rich social systems whereby we don't like freeloaders. And there's a reason why, along with generosity, we have things like a sense of fairness and resentment at people who cheat. I think that's fine. I don't think you have to be relentlessly and endlessly generous to someone who's obnoxious and who's a freeloader. There are plenty of people who are worthy recipients of generosity and who will respond. So it's try it, and then if it doesn't work, move on and try with someone else.
Yeah, I've heard it said that sort of having healthy boundaries is a form of kindness to yourself and to others as well. So that maybe that boundary is like, well, that person is not harnessing my generosity in a good way. I will either, shut that down or move on to another opportunity. I think that's a really wise bit of advice. There were lots of TED fans here, it seems, Chris, as you might not be surprised to hear. Mitch says, love the work of TED. Who's been the best guest and which talk has transformed your view of the world the most?
Oh, the trouble is I'm nerdy, so I'm going to give I mean, my boring answer to that is that my view of the world has been transformed by David Deutsch, who's a physicist, and it's a very nerdy talk about the power of knowledge and how knowledge is actually as powerful a force in the universe as anything else. Um, but the in terms of overall ripple effects of TED, definitely Sir Ken Robinson's talk is still probably the most influential. I learned last year of a woman in India who listened to it, and as a result, started her own version of TED, to because she was so inspired by it. And so there are now 100 million people a month outside of India's usual education systems who are hearing Josh talks as they're called. So that's probably been the most influential talk still overall, but different strokes for different folks.
I love that Josh talks story in the book. It's so beautiful. Clifford's made an interesting observation that links back to what we were saying at the start about human nature. He says humans are herd creatures. If we're led by evil, then we maybe become evil. If we're led by kindness, maybe we become kind. I guess the question is how can we encourage more of our leaders to sort of embrace a generosity model rather than a sort of what you might call a self-interested or even a sort of antagonistic approach.
Yeah, boy, couldn't how powerful would it be to have a leader, a national leader, find a way of incorporating generosity? I've often thought actually that a president or a prime minister could summon the rich to number 10 or to the White House or to wherever it is and say, look, I could raise your taxes, maybe we'll have to, but I'd like to give you a chance to be heroes. Here are 300 absolutely key initiatives nationally that are currently underfunded. Anyone willing to sign up? You'll get nothing except your name on it, but would you do it? And I think people might be amazed at what happens as a result of that. But the other thing I'd say is that in this connected age, we all are leaders. Like literally everyone's words have the chance to influence other people. The whole notion of one of the reasons I call this infectious generosity, I wrote out of it during the pandemic, and you've got a little virus there, the little virus before it entered a body in Wuhan, China, in late 2019, I guess it was, tiny, completely inconsequential, but one little tweak, and that tiny little thing that weighs a trillionth of a gram completely shut down the world economy. I mean, it's everyone in a connected era. If you can do something and figure out how to make it infectious, all bets are off.
And we want to have infection of the positive, uplifting kind very much.
Exactly.
Tam's asked a question which links to some things you've been saying here about, well, it says, any tips on how we can, quote, fix the internet when so many good and kind people may choose to stay off or stay quiet? People recognize the social networks, like the downsides of liking and reacting can be bad for our mental health and well-being. So maybe we're missing some of this potential to spread kindness because we're disconnecting from the toxicity of the web.
Yeah, so I'd say two things. One is my framework for what's gone wrong with the internet is that the people who designed it didn't distinguish between our lizard brains and our reflective selves. And the internet's designed to feed off rapid cue, what Danny Kahneman would call system one thinking, lizard brain thinking, or unconscious thinking, like, click, go. That is what the algorithms are built on. And that is what, therefore, the attention feed that they give us is fine-tuned to our lizard brain selves, our instinctive selves. That's why we all doom scroll. if we can shift attention to our reflective selves, if we can empower our reflective selves, everything changes. And so the conscious choices. So don't be a zombie when you're online. Be consciously, carefully, in the same way that you plan your diet or your exercise regime, carefully think about who you want to follow, how much time you do want to spend online, how you want to amplify other people. If enough people can bring their reflective selves to the game, that will help change. And then secondly, there are just specific things that can help something go viral. Um, the two that I'd maybe mention here are courage and creativity. People respond to both of those things. So if you're going to tell a story or do something good, try and find a way to do it that's super creative. And you may be amazed then at what happens. I quote in the book story of these, this group of friends in Japan who wanted to pick up litter in the streets of Tokyo. And so they did it as samurai warriors, and they shot these videos where they were collecting this litter with great drama, and it was so spectacular and funny. And of course, the videos went viral, and as a result, a lot of other people formed groups to pick up litter. Creativity is a key part of it, and just courage and being bold. I already mentioned the story of Daryl Davis, but any any effort that you can do where you can just take a deep breath and say, could I do it more boldly? It may well be worth doing it, because the difference between virality and non-virality is actually really slim. If 10 people see something and pass it on to 9 people, it doesn't get very far. If those same 10 people pass it on to 11 other people, and that pattern continues, millions of people get reached. So the difference between those two is only like a 20% increase in appeal. But if you cross that threshold, all bets are off. And so I just think it's for those of us who are fighting for good, that naturally there's a human psychology problem, which is that earnest goodness is boring. Evil is compelling. This is unfortunately, it's a human feature. So we've got to be smart about this, tactical, and figure out how to trigger the things that make someone go, yeah, I'm going to share that.
Yeah, how to make kindness cool, really, isn't it? The way I do this in my life, imperfectly, of course, is when I see something that grabs me with like oh, that's shocking, that's awful. I consciously say, I'm actually not going to share that. I'm not going to pass that on unless I think there's a particular danger or need. And when I see something that's like, oh, that's really heartwarming, that's really amazing, I consciously sort of try and share it more. And I think if more of us just made that slight adjustment to like which things we choose to forward on WhatsApp or which things we choose to retweet or whatever the right phrase is, that feels like that could be that 20% you just talked about.
Yes, I think so.
Julie's asked a question. We're going to running out of time, but Julie's asked a really interesting point about: is there a nation or tribe that's known for their kindness, and how have they got it sussed? And actually, just to add, I think everyone here is in some way part of a mini tribe, because Action for Happiness has this idea of a pledge that we make to all try and create more happiness and less unhappiness in the world, and that's our kind of way of living. So I think by being here, you're all to some extent, hopefully, part of a generous tribe. But what other examples are there, Chris?
I mean, I think humans are more the same than they are different, and that applies to different nations. I mean, in general, Eastern cultures are better at recognizing community. We're way too individualistic in the West, and it actually means we don't even understand ourselves as well as we might. But I don't know. No, I think I'd point to individual groups online like this one. I feel the same about the tech community. Um, pick places where the culture, the assumptive culture, is to treat each other with respect. It's really a lot nicer.
It really is a lot nicer. That's a really lovely point. In my decade or so of doing this compared to previous decades in other areas, it's just amazingly how much more heartwarming it is to be focused on this with people who are like-minded. It's just so much better way of living. And so if more people could discover that, I think the world will be a naturally more generous place. Chris, before we close, I would love to turn back to this amazing community and thank you everyone for all of the insightful contributions and comments in the chat and the brilliant questions. Take a moment wherever you are in the world right now and just think about something you'd like to do as a result of the inspiring things we've learned from Chris in this conversation today, what's one way you could help contribute to this revolution in generosity? So, if anyone would like to, it really helps to sort of put a few words into writing. So, maybe you'd like to share in the chat just a couple of things about what you've been inspired to do, to share, to say, to be, to spread. So, I'll just read a few of these out again. Share my creativity. Are there some other references? Shop at small businesses in my area. See the best in others. Pass gratitude to my students. Read Chris's book. Share Action for Happiness with 11 people. Thank you. Offer mentoring. Say hi to people on my walk around my neighborhood. Help the homeless. Keep smiling. Give attention. Pick up litter. Sing for a stranger. Arrange a walking group. Volunteer. Compliment others. Make people laugh in the office. Do random acts of kindness. Ask better questions in group settings, tell my friends about this, teach more positive psychology, show empathy, build bridges. I love this list. This is making me feel inspired just seeing these fly past, Chris. How are you feeling?
Yes. No, I'm feeling good. I just chipped in my own contribution. Again, thanks to a generous TED donor, there's I can give away copies of the digital version of Infectious Generosity if anyone wants one. I put the URL in there, ted.com/generosity. You should be able to claim a copy, either the audiobook, where you have to put up with my voice, or the ebook, where you don't. But no, I'm so interested in any stories of anyone who reads this and anything that happens next. So there's a way of getting that back to me at some point would be great. But
That's wonderful. So, Chris, we will send around the link tomorrow with a link to this video to everyone who's signed up, a link to the book, but also we'll repeat that link that you kindly shared in the chat to the free ebook. And I guess you'd love people to spread the word about this concept and this idea, presumably.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you read in publishing, but the tagline is the ultimate idea we're spreading. I can make the argument that that is true. In a divided world, everything that humans have ever done has been based on cooperation, and we're forgetting our superpower. It's very dangerous, and it's fixable.
Yes, we're forgetting our superpower, and I think, as you've reminded us today, our superpower is this instinct we all have to be generous, as well as to look at for ourselves. And these two things can go hand in hand. And I feel that you've reminded us that we really can create a happier and kinder world together. Chris, thank you so much for your work, for TED, for all the millions of lives you've touched, and for making time for us all today. We're incredibly grateful for your generosity. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for participating in this. And please do take away these ideas and help spread some of these ripples of kindness in the world around you. Chris, is there a final thought you'd like to leave us with?
No, just gratitude for having a chance to hang out with you for an hour. This really is a wonderful community. This is rare. Treasure it. Thank you.
Thank you all, and special thanks again, Chris. See you again soon.